Hello and welcome, crack souls of the internet, to Real Reddit Horror, the series where I read horror stories from Redditors that they swear are true. In this episode, I have 4 horrifying encounters that are allegedly true. So now, let's dive right into the realm of horror. Witnessed a ritual in a cemetery, from chemical_cupcake_100. This happened about 5 years ago, back when I was going through hard times and was homeless. I used to live in Denver, Colorado, which is where this story took place. There are several cemeteries in the Denver area, but there's one on the outskirts of Denver that's very large and very old. I think it may be the oldest one that's still being actively used. Before I became homeless, I didn't know much about this area. I had always gotten a creepy feeling around there, but didn't know why until I was on the streets. After that, I heard from many different people that it's got lots of underground tunnels, and some homeless people live in these tunnels. But in the deeper tunnels, there is cult activity. These tunnels have secret entrances all over the area, and the homeless that live around this area avoid some of these spider holes because people have been known to disappear near them, mostly women. This area has a river going through it, alongside the graveyard. One side of the river has a darker feel than the other. It's eerie over there, and it smells like death. One time, I was wandering the area with a few other acquaintances, safety in numbers and all that. We had nowhere to go and decided to hang out in the abandoned part of the graveyard on the other side. It had just gotten dark, and it was windy. It was also fall, so it was cold. We were huddled up against gravestones to block the wind. One of the people I was with knew the area better than me, and he had warned me to be very vigilant. I figured this was so we didn't attract the attention of security or police or fellow homeless, but I later found out why he was so anxious about the area. It was probably around 10 p.m. We had all sort of just been sitting in silence, trying to stay warm, and hoping that the night passed quickly, when I heard my acquaintance, let's call him Jay, whisper, "Hey, heads up, keep quiet." I had already been quiet, but I immediately tensed up, assuming he had spotted security or something. But as I looked around, I saw in the distance some small, flickering lights appearing here and there all around the graveyard. It's like people had been spread all around the large graveyard, and they were all holding lighters that they flicked on, which only then showed they were all over. After my eyes adjusted a bit, I recognized they seemed to be candles. I looked harder and could sort of see the outlines of people holding these candles. Jay whispered, "We gotta go." We clumsily started grabbing the few items we had around us. Jay came right up next to me and said, "Follow me and don't look at them." I was thinking, what the fuck? Me and our other friend quickly started following Jay, moving at a quick walk speed to the break in the fence where we had come in. I was stupid enough to look behind me and saw the figures continuing to appear all around us, and they were walking to the middle of the graveyard to stand in a circle. I passed by a few and saw out of the corner of my eye that they were wearing black cloaks. I could feel the menacing presence and stares, like they were daring me to look at them, but I had an overwhelming feeling that if we left them alone, they would leave us alone. One thing that haunted me afterwards was the way they seemed to move towards the middle. They moved quickly and smoothly, like they were gliding. A stereotype, I know, but they just seemed to morph out of the darkness. My instincts were on high alert. I knew whoever they were pure evil. We got the hell out of there, and once we got to the fence, we full-on sprinted for a few blocks. Jay didn't explain much. He just said to avoid those people, and don't ever look them in the eye, or they could have power over you. I definitely had gotten that feeling from the encounter. I asked why they weren't scared of cops or security. And Jay basically said that they got away with the stuff they did because the authorities didn't want to risk looking into it because they didn't want to be targeted. I don't know how true this is, but I do know what I saw and felt. I asked Kimiko if she believed these people were doing a ritual to try to summon something or someone. She responded with this: I don't know, but I think they maybe do sacrifices, because the same guy, Jay, told me at another point that he had a very close friend who had been found dead in that same graveyard of a supposedly self-inflicted stab wound in the neck that was ruled a suicide. The thing is, that friend had never shown any suicidal tendencies or thoughts and had been acting paranoid the last few weeks of his life. He thought he was being followed. This man was a homeless disabled vet, so it's hard to say where his mind was at, but apparently Jay knew him well and believed suicide was not likely. Even if it was, that's a very unusual way to do it and a weird place to do it at. There were also rumors that the disappearing women were being taken by the same group into the lower levels of the tunnels for sacrifices as well. This is all heresy, but after what I saw and the feeling I got from that place, and the fact that I heard this from multiple people who did not know each other, gives me reason to think there's definitely something to it. I think whatever they were doing was cult/satanic related, rather than trying to contact a dead loved one or something like that. Those Damn Eyes, from I Don't Know a God Nam 3. In the summer of 2021, I was 16, and being a Mormon in Utah, I would go on yearly young man's camps. This year, we were going up to the north side of Bear Lake, closer to Idaho. We were going up for 5 days in July. When we got up there, it felt off, as if I wasn't supposed to be there, though I wrote it off as it just being in the mountains and me being paranoid. The first thing we did after getting set up was go on a hike. There was a trail that was kind of shaped like a horseshoe. It was very steep and unkept. It took us until sunset to get back to camp. Once we got back, I had realized I left my camera at the highest point of the trail, also being in the middle of it. So I decided to go back up and grab it on my own. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. In fact, I told them I was going to the bathroom because I was kind of embarrassed. On the way up the trail, I noticed how quiet it was. Not even crickets could be heard. My footsteps sounded so loud. Once I got to the place I had left my camera, it wasn't where it should have been lying on the path. It was hanging from a tree branch directly above the trail. I had to use a long stick to reach it. There was no way I could have put it up there. At the time, I was 5'7", and this branch was at least 8 feet up. I was very on edge at this point. As I was heading back, I felt like I was being watched, before hearing a metallic-like noise in the woods up the mountain. For context, the camp was at the base of this mountain, and there was a small plateau with a clearing in the middle. The peak of that trail was in this clearing. Beyond the plateau was just steep forest with nothing in it. There was absolutely no way a car or anything could get up there. It's impossible. And no, it was not an echo. The mountain did not echo that loudly. After hearing this metallic-like noise, I froze. I couldn't move. I was too scared. I stood there for what seemed like hours, though it was probably 3 minutes or so. And then I saw this huge creature walking towards me. This was no animal. It felt demonic. It was at least 9 feet tall, maybe more, and it had glowing eyes. And this wasn't eye shine, because it was very dark due to the sun being behind the mountains, and it had this dark, thick fur, maybe a dark brown color. At some point, I could move. It was still there, but it was just standing there, slightly hunched over. It was not a human, as it didn't have the same proportions. Once I could move, I invoked Jesus' name, and then it left. This thing was not an animal. It was a demon. I got back to camp and had dinner. I was only gone for 30 minutes, but my God, it felt like hours. I didn't tell anyone about this, as I thought they would think I was lying. The next 2 days, nothing happened. But on the 4th day when we woke up, all of our food was out and the cooler was open. There were large footprints, like 3 times the size of my feet, and I'm a size 16. This was no man. It was that same thing I saw on the trail. Nothing else really happened on that trip, but ever since I saw that thing, I've fallen into a deep depression. I tried to kill myself in early 2023. I'm okay now, just deeply terrified of those damn eyes. It was like that thing would rip me limb from limb if it got a hold of me. I haven't gone camping since, though I've planned a trip with my great uncles this year. I feel obligated to. Since my grandpa died, they've been quite depressed. They were his younger brothers. He died in May if you're wondering. And yes, I'm still a Mormon, as I firmly believe our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ saved me that day. Anyway, have a great day. Honestly, when Nam said that this demonic creature was 9 feet tall, I immediately thought of a bear. I googled what type of bears are in Utah, and I learned that only American black bears reside in that state, and they are only 5'7" standing up. He also said the creature had glowing eyes, and that there wasn't enough light for it to be eye shine due to the sun being behind the mountains. It is of course possible that Nam could be exaggerating the height of the creature and the glowing eyes. Nam said the creature left after he invoked Jesus' name. If the creature really was a bear, then shouting loudly could make them back off from you. This story is allegedly true, but tell me what you think in the comments. I saw God and lived. From final_individual 847. Since finally being diagnosed with schizophrenia last year, at the age of 18, I've been navigating the challenging and often frustrating process of finding the right treatment. It's been a journey marked by trial and error, as each new medication brings its own set of potential benefits and side effects. Some medications seem promising at first, but then fall short, while others might alleviate certain symptoms, but introduce new challenges. It's a constant balancing act, working closely with my psychiatrist to adjust dosages and try different combinations. I understand this process needs patience and understanding, but it's overall just been difficult. I've had my share of auditory and visual hallucinations, even being in psychosis and having to go to a psychiatric center twice. I've had voices tell me to hurt myself and others, visual hallucinations that related to my trauma or something entirely different. I'd dive into everything if anyone cared, but I'll dive into my craziest hallucination. Keep in mind, I'm not very religious at all. I believe God exists, but I don't worship God. July 13th, 2023. I was alone in my quiet, dimly lit room. I sat hunched over my computer screen, engrossed in one of my new favorite games, the Resident Evil 4 remake. The soft glow from the lamp behind me was the only source of light in the room. My breathing was steady. I felt calm and relaxed. The lamp's light cast my silhouette onto the wall in front of me, a shadow mirroring my seated position. On the wall was a cross, hung in the middle to hover above the ground. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal, but then, in my line of sight, I noticed something that made my eyes jump. My shadow, which had mimicked my every move, began to shift independently. Slowly, it rose from a seated position to a standing one, as if it had a will of its own. My breath was caught in between my throat, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. The room seemed to shrink around me, the familiar walls closing in as the impossible unfolded before my eyes. My mind raced, and I felt the unsettling grip of fear tightening around my chest. The vision appeared suddenly, overwhelmingly in its intensity. There before my eyes stood a figure that seemed both human and ethereal, radiating a blinding light that filled the space with an otherworldly glow. It was God, or at least that was the horrifying perception. Its body was pale white with skin and bones, like It looked like the body had no muscles or flesh. Its skeleton was abnormal. The ribcage was too enlarged for its body. It only had pale skin sheathing its bones. The hands were big and long with pitch black nails. It was tall. I examined its face, and it was horrifying, otherworldly, haunting. The teeth were painted white. Its mouth was dripping in this black saliva. The mouth was enlarged. It looked like it almost had a forced smile. I searched more and more, and those eyes were so deep and unyielding. It was like it was looking directly into my soul. I felt unreal, as if every other emotion was drained from my body, and the only emotion I was holding on to was my fear. It was like I couldn't move or produce a single sound from my vocal cords. I had never picked up a Bible before, only glancing bits and pieces of scriptures from various sources over the years. Yet, one verse had always stuck with me. Exodus 33:20. He said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." As the horrifying vestige of God appeared before me, those words echoed in my mind, and a chilling realization gripped me. The face was both majestic and terrifying, an ethereal presence that seemed to strip away the very essence of my being. I felt as though my soul was being rent from my body. The overwhelming fear that I was about to die was tightening its hold on my heart. Every instinct screamed that this vision was a prelude to my end, and I was left paralyzed, unable to tear my eyes away from this divine and dreadful being that had invaded my reality. There was nothing and everything in those eyes. In my mind right now, I can picture those eyes. If I could draw it, I'd show how frightening it really was. I felt as if time flew by while this was happening to me. Then, for a second, I could finally move, and I fell out of my chair. The cross that hung on the wall was in my hands. Till today, I don't remember yanking the cross or putting it in my hands. I have no memory of that. I looked back at the wall in front of me, and the being vanished out of my line of sight. The room circled back to where everything was, and my shadow was once again mimicking my movements. I had begun to question everything, my reality, my life, my mind. I curled up in a ball and started crying. I had hoped it was just a nightmare that could have been the result of me passing out in my chair or another hallucination due to my schizophrenia. I don't know. If you ask me now, part of me believes it really was a hallucination. Another part of me believes that it was real. That could be due to my delusional thinking, but I'm not sure. All I know is that I had to move out of the house that I was staying at where my grandmother lived, and I went to stay with my aunts. I will never crowd myself near anything related to it. I will never look at the skies or the heavens the same way again. I was so scared. I never discussed this with anyone around that time. I don't have any friends to talk to about this with. I don't communicate with anyone except for my mother and my psychiatrist. But yeah, that's it. I finally talked about this publicly. If anyone has any questions for me or any coping mechanisms to deal with hallucinations, feel free to tell me. I've always just frozen up and let these things happen. Either way, thank you for your time. Here are some of the comments from Final Individual's post. I don't think God is supposed to be terrifying and look horrifying. Maybe it was something else. It sounds more like a reaper of souls the way that OP described it. I've had something similar when I had sleep paralysis while lying on my back. I heard it snarling and saw dripping of black stuff from what I could see of it, and one of my eyes was covered by the pillow, which made it even more scary, having something breathing and snarling over you and you can't move your body. Sleep paralysis is terrifying. I used to experience it a lot when I used to sleep on my back, but since I stopped sleeping on my back, it stopped. What you saw sounds terrifying. Oh man, can't even begin to imagine what you saw. I have felt God's presence, not seen him, but it was calming and loving like nothing else in this world. I'm not religious nor revere him either. The closest description is a mother's love when one is very young and vulnerable. So with much humility, since it wasn't my vision, I say I don't think it was God, and again with much humility, I think your mental condition allowed you to get in sync with an entity and it manifested powerfully to you. Some entities profit from altered states of mind. They kind of feed on our emotions, and the more intense, the better for them. So they induce horror in us for that intent. My advice is to seek God within you. I'm not trying to turn you over to Christianity because I'm not religious at all either, but maybe something like yoga or meditation can help, just so you can take power from this reality who clearly tried to pass as a divine being. I hope I'm not oversimplifying your experience, and I also hope my advice doesn't sound like, y'all need Jesus, because it's not my intention. Needless to say, I believe you. The Chupacabra of Los Angeles. From Complex Economist, 563. I, a female, was in my early 20s, hitchhiking the west coast of the USA. I had been dropped off in the outskirts of LA. Exploring the area, I discovered a discreet and overgrown section of cemented canal. I set up my tent there and had an uneventful night. Don't do this. Flash floods are real. In the morning, I left the tent with a few heavier, replaceable items, dog food, canned goods, etc., and I went into the city proper to busk. When I returned to camp, my heart sank when I noticed my tent was on the other side of the trickling stream in the canal. I thought someone had vandalized or stolen some of my things. I opened the tent to find everything as I had left it, exactly as I had left it. I started to gaslight myself. You were tired last night and excited this morning. You came in off a different street. Still, I felt uneasy. It was too late to find a different spot, so I resigned myself to moving my tent back across the stream. I curled up with my dog in my lap and my knife at my side in case whoever moved my tent came back. Unable to fall asleep, I read by the light of a street lamp. The book distracted me from the day's events, yet sleep did not come. Hours passed. How many, I cannot say. Eventually, the soft hum of hungry mosquitoes was cut with the rhythmic click-clack of claws on cement. A sense of dread washed over me. I grabbed my knife in one hand and pulled my dog in closer to keep her calm and quiet. My blood froze as footsteps drew closer. I listened. It only sounded like it was one critter, with no human accompanying it. Trying to calm down, I thought, no need to worry, no need to bother it, it will pass. Until the steps stopped, directly across the stream. It paused, then began sniffing and scratching at the ground. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly shifted myself to peek through the netting at the top of the tent. I saw a ghastly creature lurking right where my tent had been. This thing was black and patterned with dust. It was barrel-chested and hunchbacked with feet that looked too large for it. The creature had a mane of fur from its face down to the back of it where its tail should have been, and the rest of its skin was pulled tight against bone. It couldn't have been more than 30 pounds, half the size of my dog, yet I was terrified of it. My gut told me I did not want this thing to see me, so I scrunched myself back down. I gripped my dog and knife as tightly as I could. I listened to it pace back and forth. stopping to scratch or sniff. Its demeanor grew more frantic. Its pace quickened. It began growling and snapping its jaws in the air. I waited silently, knife poised, for what felt like forever. Suddenly, it stopped. It turned and casually headed back down the canal the same way it had come. I could not sleep the rest of the night. I sat there, gripping my dog and knife until the sun rose. At the first sign of day, I packed everything up. Before I left, curiosity got the better of me again. I crossed the stream and looked where the creature had been. The ground was littered with scratch marks. I took a deep breath and left. I've never been back to LA since then. Never before or since have I been scared of an animal like that. I can't be certain what happened that dim, humid night. All I know is I will carry that feeling for the rest of my life. That feeling of being prey to something unnatural. Something sharp, hungry, and skittering. Chupacabra. Yet another story that has left me kind of speechless. Like with every other story, this one from Complex is allegedly true. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Craxo Spinner, and until the next story, I'm just in my room.